I still remember the way sunlight fell across the office that morning, cutting through the blinds in neat lines that stretched over my desk. It should have felt comforting, almost serene, but instead it felt sharp, like it was pointing directly at me, highlighting how small I suddenly felt. I had spent the last 3 weeks painstakingly preparing the presentation, staying late, refining every chart, every word, every number. It was more than just a project for me. It was proof that I could hold my own in a team that always seemed to underestimate me. I believed in my work. I believed in myself, but belief is a fragile thing. The meeting began like any other. My team gathered around the polished conference table, notebooks open, pens ready. I tried to calm the fluttering in my chest by telling myself it was just another presentation, that my voice mattered here. And for a moment I almost believed it. Then he spoke. Jason, my co-worker who had a way of making everyone feel small without lifting a finger, leaned back in his chair and smiled like he had a secret only he could enjoy. "I'd like to walk everyone through the strategy we came up with for the launch," he said. His words were simple, innocuous even, but they carried a weight that sank in immediately. I froze. My hands, resting on the edge of the table, went cold. He was taking credit for my work. Every slide I had painstakingly crafted, every insight I had carefully researched, suddenly bore his name in the minds of everyone in that room. And worse, he didn't stop there. As he explained my analysis, my recommendations, my vision, he laughed lightly, pausing occasionally to glance at me with that condescending smirk. "Clueless," he muttered under his breath, thinking no one could hear. My ears burned, my throat tightened. I wanted to shout, to correct him, to say that's mine, but somehow the words wouldn't come. The world had gone quiet, except for the hum of the projector, the flip of pages, the shallow breaths I barely noticed. I looked at my boss, hoping for the slightest flicker of acknowledgement, a hint that he saw what was happening. Instead, he nodded along, polite, approving, silent, complicit. I realized in that instant that I was utterly alone. After the meeting, I excused myself to the restroom and stared at my reflection in the mirror. My cheeks were hot, my lips trembling. I wanted to cry, to scream, to let someone know that my ideas, my effort, my hours of thinking and planning had been stolen in front of the very people whose respect I had fought for. But I didn't. I let the tears go when no one was looking, brushing them away before they left a trace. I practiced the calm expression I would wear when I returned to my desk, the one that said, "I'm fine. I can handle this." My heart felt heavy, bruised by betrayal, but I tucked it away neatly, like a letter I wasn't ready to read yet. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I watched Jason as he casually walked through the office, joking with others, basking in the attention for the work I had done. I noticed how everyone else laughed along, not questioning him, not looking at me to see if I agreed. I realized then that sometimes the people around you, the ones you thought were allies, become silent spectators to your humiliation. On the train home, I kept my hands folded in my lap, staring at the passing lights through the window. I thought about my family, about my younger sister who would always expect me to be the peacemaker, the quiet one who never raised her voice, the one who smiled even when she was hurt. I wondered if they understood what it felt like to be unseen, unrecognized, and betrayed in a world that expected you to stay small. That night I didn't call anyone. I didn't vent. I didn't cry out. I simply sat with my thoughts, letting the silence wrap around me like a heavy coat. There was pain, yes, but there was also clarity. I realized something vital. If I wanted justice, if I wanted recognition, I couldn't rely on others to give it to me. I had to create it, quietly, intentionally, without letting anger or humiliation define me. I went to bed that night feeling the weight of the day in my chest, but also a flicker of something new. a quiet determination that whispered, "You will be seen. You will be recognized, but it will be on your terms," and that whisper became my anchor. It's strange how the world outside the office can feel so disconnected from the world inside it. That evening, I walked into my apartment and was greeted by the faint smell of my mother's cooking. It should have felt comforting, familiar, but all I could taste was the lingering bitterness of the day. My hand still shook slightly as I set my bag down, the weight of silence pressing against my chest. Dinner was quiet. My parents chatted casually about mundane things, the weather, a new TV show, errands. My younger sister, Lena, pushed peas around her plate, humming softly, clearly aware that I was carrying an invisible load I didn't want to share. I caught her eyes once, fleetingly, and for a moment, I considered telling her everything, how Jason had taken credit for my work, how my boss had nodded as if approving the theft. But I didn't. There are things we say in anger, and there are things we don't say at all. Sometimes the unsaid words weigh more. Instead, I smiled. I asked polite questions about their days. I nodded at their comments. I laughed softly when my father made a joke. All the while, I felt a quiet storm brewing beneath my calm exterior. I realized something that day. Family, like colleagues, could be complicit in silence too. They didn't have to mock me openly or betray me. They could simply ignore the truth. Let me wrestle with it alone, and in doing so, they became witnesses to my quiet suffering. After dinner, Lena lingered in the kitchen, wiping dishes with a careful hand. She glanced at me, hesitating, as if weighing whether to say something. Finally, she asked softly, "Do you want to talk about it?" I shook my head, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Not right now," I said, "maybe later." She nodded, though her face carried a shadow of worry. I knew she wanted to comfort me, but comfort, I realized, wasn't something I could accept yet. Not until I understood it for myself, not until I had seen the full truth and decided how I would respond. Later that night, I sat alone in my room with the faint hum of the city outside my window. I thought about my parents, about Lena, about the life lessons hidden in silence and observation. I understood now that betrayal wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was quiet, muted by polite smiles, nods, and the expectation that one should simply endure. I also began to notice patterns in my family I hadn't fully understood before. My father avoided confrontation at all costs, often taking the easier path of silence even when he knew it caused me pain. My mother, though well-meaning, preferred harmony over honesty, brushing over uncomfortable truths to keep the peace. Lena, younger and perceptive, had learned that silence could be a shield. We all carried our own versions of quiet complicity, and in that moment, I realized I had to decide whether I would let it define me or teach me strength. The next few days at work were a haze of observation. I didn't confront Jason. I didn't seek acknowledgement from my boss. I watched, I recorded in my mind every slip, every inconsistency, every small hint that the truth was never truly hidden. It was merely waiting for the right moment to be recognized. I began writing notes to myself, keeping a private record of my contributions and the subtle betrayals I witnessed. It was therapeutic, almost ritualistic. By the end of the week, I noticed a subtle shift within myself. The hurt was still there, like a faint scar beneath my chest, but it no longer dictated my thoughts or my actions. I realized that strength was not about loud confrontation. It was about clarity, composure, and the quiet patience to let time reveal what others try to hide. That weekend, as I sat with my family again, sharing light conversation over lunch, I felt a calm settle in me that hadn't been there before. I no longer felt the desperate need to be seen or recognized by their approval. I understood that my self-worth didn't depend on others' acknowledgement. And in that quiet understanding, I found a kind of peace, soft but unshakable, like the foundation of a house built to last. It wouldn't be easy. The betrayals, the small silences, the unspoken doubts, they would continue to exist. But now I had a quiet power, the ability to observe without being crushed, to protect my heart without closing it, and to act with dignity without shouting. And for the first time, I realized that perhaps this was what true emotional strength looked like. Gentle, calm, patient, and entirely mine. By the time Monday rolled around, I had learned something crucial. The world doesn't owe you recognition, and explaining yourself often only gives others more room to dismiss you. Jason continued to present my work as his own, smiling with ease, while my boss nodded along, pretending nothing was unusual. The betrayal no longer shocked me. It merely settled into the background like a dull hum I had learned to live with. I stopped seeking validation. I stopped offering explanations. I stopped hoping that anyone else would see what I had done. Instead, I focused on quiet observation, watching the patterns of behavior around me, as if I were studying an unfamiliar animal in its habitat. I noted how Jason thrived on applause, and how easily people accepted his version of reality. I noted the subtle ways my boss protected himself from conflict, how he tilted his head and smiled when others made mistakes, never holding anyone accountable, never giving credit where it was due. And in watching, I began to understand something else. Power isn't always loud. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it waits. At home, I carried the same calm into family interactions. Dinner conversations remained polite, lightly tinged with avoidance, but I no longer sought approval or tried to justify myself. I had learned to accept the small silences and the half-truths that floated through our apartment. My family would reveal themselves over time, as all truths eventually do. For now, I simply observed. I allowed myself to notice things I hadn't before, the way my father hesitated before speaking, how my mother's attempts at harmony sometimes masked discomfort, the way Lena's eyes lingered on me, silently asking if I was okay. I realized I didn't need to respond to every unspoken question or bridge every silence. Some things deserved only quiet patience. At work, I began documenting everything meticulously. Every email I sent, every document I prepared, every idea I shared was carefully archived. I created a private system of evidence, not out of vengeance, but to protect myself from further erasure. I no longer relied on others to acknowledge my contributions. I relied on the proof of my own diligence. I also began to approach my work differently. Instead of trying to shine in the moment or seeking immediate recognition, I focused on long-term impact. I refined my ideas so that they were undeniably valuable, so precise and complete that eventually they would speak for themselves. My voice became calm, my tone measured, my actions deliberate. The frustration that had once made my hands tremble became a quiet reservoir of energy, stored and directed rather than wasted on futile confrontation. One afternoon, Jason made a small mistake in a meeting, misquoting a figure I had researched. The room went silent, and for a fleeting second, I felt a flicker of old anger. But I didn't speak. I let the moment pass, letting the subtle error linger in the minds of everyone present. I realized I didn't need to point it out. Time and observation were doing the work I once wished I could. At home, I noticed a shift too. Lena began to mirror my calm, asking fewer questions about whether I was upset, and instead simply sitting with me in quiet understanding. My parents still carried their own tendencies toward avoidance, but I no longer needed their validation. I had cultivated a space within myself where recognition was internal, where dignity was self-sustained, and where patience had more weight than any rushed confrontation. By the end of the month, I could feel the subtle transformation in myself. My anger had been tempered by observation. My pain had been softened by understanding. I was no longer the young woman who had sat frozen in that conference room, wishing someone would see her work. I was calm, composed, and quietly powerful, not because anyone else had given me that power, but because I had claimed it for myself. And I knew deep down that the moment of reckoning would arrive, not through shouting, not through humiliation, not through anger, but through truth revealed with patience and integrity. I didn't need to chase it. I only needed to continue observing, recording, and refining my own voice. The room would eventually recognize what had always been mine. In that quiet patience, I discovered something far more valuable than immediate justice. I discovered myself. The promotion meeting was scheduled for mid-morning, and I arrived early, as I always did. The conference room smelled faintly of coffee and polished wood, the chairs arranged neatly around the long table. Jason was already there, leaning back in his chair, tapping his pen against the table with that same self-assured grin. My boss hovered nearby, checking emails, unaware, or perhaps unwilling to anticipate the turn the day would take. I didn't rush, I didn't fidget. I didn't seek anyone's approval. I simply sat quietly, letting the minutes pass as I focused on the rhythm of my own breathing, the clarity of my thoughts, and the calm certainty that the truth had its own timing. When the CEO entered, the room straightened instinctively. He was a tall man with a soft, measured voice, the kind of presence that demanded attention without raising it. He greeted the team politely, exchanged a few customary pleasantries, and then, with no preamble, said, "Before we discuss promotions, let's review the original submissions for the upcoming launch." I felt my chest tighten, not with fear but with anticipation. The words hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. Everyone exchanged glances, including Jason, whose confident grin faltered ever so slightly. "Original submissions," he repeated, forcing a casual tone. "Yes," the CEO said, his voice calm but unwavering. "We'll start with the work each of you personally contributed. I think it's important to acknowledge whose vision we are really celebrating." The room went still. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to pause. My boss's eyes flicked to mine briefly, and I caught a shadow of realization there. He had ignored the truth before, but now the truth itself had arrived. I handed over my carefully organized documentation, the slides, notes, emails, timestamps, every piece of evidence showing my work from inception to completion. I watched Jason's fingers tighten around his pen, his confidence slipping, though he tried to mask it with a polite smile. The CEO flipped through the files methodically, his brow furrowed slightly, not in anger, but in quiet recognition. "Impressive," he said finally. "These are thorough, innovative, and clearly the result of significant effort. Thank you for bringing them forward." The subtlety of the praise was all the sweeter because it was quiet, dignified, and complete. There was no need to shout, to humiliate, or to point fingers. The facts themselves had done the work. Jason's color shifted, a flicker of panic in his eyes. I didn't gloat. I didn't speak. I simply observed, my heart calm, my dignity intact. I felt Lena's presence in my memory, the quiet encouragement she had given me without words. I thought of my parents and the lessons I had learned about patience, observation, and self-respect. When the CEO asked if I would like to present my plan for the team, I nodded with a serene smile. My voice was steady, measured, confident. As I spoke, I felt the subtle shift in the room, colleagues leaning in, nodding, recognizing the depth and clarity of my work. My ideas resonated not because I demanded attention, but because they deserved it. Later, when promotions were announced, my name was called first. Not loudly, not with fanfare, but with the quiet authority of merit. Jason was promoted as well, but there was a softening in the room, a recognition that while he had charisma, the real vision had always been mine. His earlier arrogance had lost its sheen, replaced by a cautious humility he hadn't anticipated. I left the meeting not with triumph in my chest, but with a deep, serene satisfaction. The recognition I had quietly earned wasn't just professional, it was personal. I had learned that patience, observation, and integrity carry their own weight, often heavier and more enduring than the fleeting satisfaction of revenge. That evening, I called Lena. She picked up on the first ring, and we spoke quietly about the day. I shared only the highlights, leaving out any triumphalist detail. We laughed softly, a shared understanding passing between us. Later, I sat by my window, the city lights flickering like stars, and felt the soft glow of peace settle into my chest. I had been betrayed, I had been unseen, I had felt the sting of silence and dismissal. But in the end, I realized the most profound victory isn't in shaming those who wronged you. It's in reclaiming your own voice, your own dignity, and your own calm. And in that quiet evening, with the world still and steady around me, I finally understood. The measure of strength is not in loud retaliation, but in quiet endurance, patient wisdom, and unwavering confidence that truth has its own way of arriving.